Sarah Chen had always been told she had terrible timing. Standing before the crumbling stone throne on the abandoned planet of Kethmoran, surrounded by her increasingly nervous alien archaeology team, she was beginning to think they might have a point. The inscriptions clearly state this structure is over 10,000 years old, chittered Zixtel, the insectoid team leader, his forearms gesticulating wildly at the ancient symbols carved into the weathered stone. The Kethmorani civilization vanished without a trace. We should proceed with extreme caution. Sarah pushed a strand of black hair from her eyes and squinted at the throne. It sat atop a raised dais in what had once been a grand hall, now open to the violet sky through a collapsed roof. The seat itself was simple, just carved stone worn smooth by millennia, but something about it made her skin prickle. Relax. Six, she said, pulling out her scanner. It's just a chair, a really, really old chair. Dr. Velnara, the expedition's Altarian historian, fluttered her gossamer wings nervously. The humans have such a casual relationship with ancient artifacts, she whispered to Zixtel in what she thought was a quiet tone. It's simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. Sarah pretended not to hear. She'd been the only human on enough alien dig sites to know what they thought of her species. Reckless, impulsive, and far too willing to touch things that probably shouldn't be touched. The fact that this approach had led to more archaeological breakthroughs in the past decade than the previous century was beside the point. Her scanner beeped softly as it analyzed the throne's composition. Interesting. It's not native stone. The mineral signature doesn't match anything else on this planet, and there are traces of something else, energy residue maybe. All the more reason to maintain distance, Zixtel insisted, his mandibles clicking anxiously. The Kethmorani were known for their advanced technology before their disappearance. This could be some sort of trap or— Oh, come on, Sarah interrupted, walking closer to the throne. Look at this place. If there was going to be some ancient defense system, wouldn't it have activated by now? We've been tramping around here for 3 days. She gestured at the ruins around them. Vines had crept through the broken walls, small animals nested in the crevices, and everything was covered in a fine layer of dust and debris. It looked about as threatening as her grandmother's attic. Besides, she continued, sometimes the best way to learn about something is to interact with it directly. Dr. Velnara's wings fluttered faster. That is exactly the kind of thinking that makes the rest of the galaxy nervous about humans. Sarah grinned. And yet here you are, hiring us for your expeditions because we get results. She approached the throne, running her fingers along its armrests. The stone was surprisingly warm, and she could have sworn she felt a faint vibration beneath her palm. The craftsmanship is incredible, she murmured, leaning closer to examine the subtle patterns carved into the surface. These aren't just decorative, they look almost like circuit patterns. Sarah, Zixtel's voice carried a warning tone. Please step away from the artifact. Just give me a minute, she said, completely absorbed in her examination. The patterns seemed to shift and flow when she wasn't looking directly at them, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Without really thinking about it, she sat down on the throne. The reaction was immediate. The stone beneath her flared with brilliant blue light, and the circuit-like patterns began to pulse in waves radiating outward from where she sat. Oh, entire structure hummed with power, sending vibrations through the ancient hall. Sarah, Zixtel shrieked, all four arms flailing. Get off that thing immediately. But Sarah was frozen, not by fear, but by the sudden flood of information pouring into her mind. Images, memories, knowledge that wasn't her own, the history of a proud race, their achievements, their desperate final days as their son began to die. I can see them, she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the charged air. The Kethmorani. They didn't disappear, they transcended, but they left. Guardians. The ground began to shake and dust rained down from what remained of the ceiling. Outside, the violet sky darkened as massive shadows passed overhead. Dragons, Dr. Velnara breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing through the broken roof. Actual dragons. They weren't the mythical creatures from human folklore, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Serpentine, bodies hundreds of meters long, covered in scales that shimmered with the same blue energy as the throne. Vast wings that seemed to be made of solid light rather than membrane and bone. Eyes like stars that had learned to burn cold. One of the magnificent beings descended, landing in the courtyard beyond the hall with surprising grace for something so massive. When it spoke, its voice resonated not through the air, but directly in their minds. The throne recognizes one worthy of the ancient pact. The guardians of Keth Moran awaken. Sarah, still glowing with the throne's energy, somehow understood. They made a deal with these beings before they left. Protection for the planet in exchange for something. But the contract needed renewal and there was no one left to do it. Until now, the dragon agreed. The blood of explorers, the mind that seeks knowledge without fear. These were the conditions set by our long-departed friends. Zixtel's mandibles were chattering so rapidly they sounded like a percussion instrument. Sarah, do you realize what you've done? You've apparently just signed humanity up for some sort of cosmic contract. Sarah laughed, a sound bright with wonder and only slightly tinged with hysteria. Actually, I think I just slapped a chair. The contract thing seems to be a bonus. More dragons circled overhead, their calls echoing across the landscape like songs that could crack mountains. The one in the courtyard lowered its great head until it was level with the broken wall. Will you accept the responsibility, small explorer? The guardianship comes with knowledge, with power, but also with duty. Sarah looked at her terrified colleagues, then back at the magnificent being waiting for her answer. She thought about the human tendency to leap before looking, to touch the untouchable, to say yes to adventures that any sensible species would run screaming from. Well, she said, standing up from the throne but keeping one hand on its armrest. I did come here. Looking for a discovery, I guess I found a big one. She grinned at the dragon, that particularly human expression that conveyed equal parts excitement and complete disregard for personal safety. I accept. The sky filled with dragon song, and Sarah Chen learned that sometimes the best adventures begin with the worst decisions. Humanity had just inherited guardianship of an ancient world, and as usual they'd stumbled into it completely by accident. Zixtel made a note in his expedition log. Recommendation: never again hire humans for archaeological work. Also, invest heavily in human archaeological expeditions immediately. Some contradictions, he reflected, were simply too profitable to resolve.